As with Judaism, I am going to start with a very fast and basic history of Christianity and a description of the basic doctrines and tenets. Again, this is very basic. I am not intending to go deep here as in a religious studies class, but I think we are going to need to have some foundational understanding of Christianity because going forward from this point, the Christian church will be the major patron of art. And so just about everything that we're looking at until we get to non-Western art will be Christian art. In your book, there is a list of the major figures in Christianity and the major stories. I've also posted several videos that can give you some more context if you're interested and you're not familiar with Christianity. But this will serve as sort of the basic history that we need to understand as we move forward. In the beginning, early Christians were early Jewish followers of Jesus. And I think it's important to understand that in Jesus's lifetime, he was preaching to almost exclusively Jewish followers. As it evolved, Christians believe in one God manifest in three beings: the Trinity of God the Father, the Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. As we move forward, Mary will become a increasingly important figure. Mary is sometimes known as the Virgin Mary or Saint Mary. They're all the same person, but she is the mother of Jesus who gave birth by virgin birth, meaning that God is the father of Jesus and Mary is his mortal mother. And therefore, she kind of represents both his figure at both Jesus's figure as divine because of his status as being the Son of God, but also his mortal manifestation because he was born of a mortal woman. Christianity has an emphasis on the afterlife, and unlike Roman religion, which believed that there was something that happened after death, they didn't have a very clear understanding or clear vision of what that might be. Christianity really believed in life as a way of attaining salvation. And your behavior in life was your way to a life after death and heaven. So we see lots of depictions of what that might look like. Over time, Christianity centers on a communal worship, a ritual that is based on the Last Supper. Christ's teachings are spread through the writings of the four evangelists, four disciples that wrote down Jesus's words and spread them throughout the Roman Empire. And they are Saint Matthew, who is generally represented by a winged man or an angel, Saint Mark, who is represented by a winged lion, Saint Luke, the winged ox, and then Saint John, who is an eagle. And so again, during Jesus's lifetime, he was preaching to a very small group, his own disciples and apostles. But it wasn't until these four figures wrote down his words and then traveled throughout preaching Christ's teachings before Christianity spread. There are two major rituals that are very important in Christianity. First is baptism, in which the faithful are baptized with holy water, reenacting the baptism of Christ by John the Baptist. And the second is the Eucharist, which evolved from the Jewish Passover meal that becomes the Last Supper. And these two rituals become central to Christianity. The reenactment of the Eucharist at every Mass becomes the central ritual around which worship is organized. There are two major dates to remember about how Christianity becomes organized and legitimized within the Roman Empire. It's not really until about 300 years after the birth of Christ that Christianity starts to be recognized as a legitimate and widely spreading religion. The first date is in 313 during the reign of Constantine, in which he makes religious tolerance the law of the land. And this is at the point where Christianity really can't be denied in the Roman Empire anymore. It had spread so far and wide, and Constantine himself winds up converting to Christianity in 330. And the second is the Council of Nicaea, which set up uniform Christian doctrines and really defined Christianity and set up the rules and the administrative structure of the Christian church, which of course at this time is the Catholic Church. Before this, Christians had been persecuted to different degrees at different times. For the most part, the Romans were not particularly bothered by them, except when it clashed with the Roman state religion. Remember back when we were talking about the Roman religion, the polytheistic religion that included an imperial cult. Roman citizens were expected to worship and make sacrifices to the imperial cult. And this was a problem for Christians because Christians only believed in one God. And so this is when they would run into conflict with the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, throughout this persecution, Christianity persisted and it spread. And it really, because of its emphasis on the afterlife, it really promised a better life for Romans, that as the Roman Empire started to crumble, you can imagine that a religion that promised an afterlife in which there would be no suffering and you would sit in the heavens with the God that you worshiped was very attractive to, say, Roman peasants that were toiling in the fields, or Roman soldiers that were fighting on the edges of the empire. It was a very attractive religion, and therefore it spreaded like wildfire throughout the Roman Empire. By around 100 CE, well-educated elite of the Roman Empire started to become attracted to this religion, and rituals became more elaborate and ornate. And this is when religion becomes more organized and there is an administrative structure that develops. At the top of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is the Pope, who resides in Rome, and he is the successor to the first Pope, St. Peter, who held the keys of the Catholic Church. Under that are bishops that are regional heads of the church that all answer to the Pope in Rome. Like Judaism, one of the foundational texts of the Catholic Church is the Old Testament. So, like the Jewish faith, they believe in the Ten Commandments. So the second commandment also makes art very problematic at the beginning of Christianity. And Christianity really has no imagery at the beginning, and so will draw on the images of Judaism and very specifically the Roman tradition. But as it forbade images, it looked to symbolic images from Judaism and from the Roman tradition to create meaning. And because it was a religion that relied on conversion and relied on teaching, ostensibly to a populace that spoke many different religions and was for the most part illiterate, it really needed a formal vocabulary of imagery in order to teach and spread their religion. So here is the problem. And so at the very beginning of Christianity, we see a system called syncretism, in which images and symbols are borrowed from other traditions and gave them new meanings. And these borrowings can be made sometimes unconsciously and sometimes deliberate. I'm showing you here two images of non-figural symbols. They both look like anchors. One is a Roman coin, the coin of Antiochus from a couple of centuries before the birth of Christ, in which we see simply an anchor. And an anchor for Antiochus could be a symbol of the emperor's fame as a maritime leader, of trade, the rule over the sea. There's lots of symbolism that comes with an anchor. When we see it in a Christian context, we have some other symbolic meanings that come along with an anchor. We see a little fish that might represent Christ's story, some of stories of the loaves and the fishes, his disciples, some of his disciples' identities as fishermen, and the stories of Christ walking on water. It calls to mind some of the teachings that would have got along with the New Testament. And so we have a transference of symbolic meaning from a Roman context to a Christian context. And we'll see this strategy used by artists that's particularly helpful in a time during persecution when Christianity had to operate underground in hiding. And then when it becomes a legitimate religion, it becomes a way of teaching and using these images when images in themselves are under suspect because of the second commandment. If we look at the catacombs, remember we looked at the catacombs before in a Jewish context. This is a room that is devoted to the Christian burials, and we even get a glimpse at the skulls and bones of the deceased here in this these very creepy niches. If we look at the ceiling, we see some images that represent this syncretism. Specifically, if we look at these figures, these four figures with their outstretched arms, these are gestures that in the Roman context might suggest philosophers teaching. But in the Christian context, they are the evangelists who are preaching Christ's word, and they are called orants. We also even see this recumbent figure, which looks like a kind of Greco-Roman personification of a river god or even the dying Gaul. But here it represents Jonah from the Jewish tradition or the Old Testament story. If we look at the very center, we see a figure of the calf bearer and the good shepherd. In a Greco-Roman context, and I'm showing you an archaic calf bearer here on the left, it references the story of Apollos or Hermes, in which Hermes was anointed after the theft of Apollo's sacred cattle herds. And we see him, Hermes, bringing back one of the calves. In the Christian context, it references John 10:11, in which he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd layeth down his life for the sheep. And we see some very important differences. Of course, Hermes is portrayed in the nude, and Christ is represented in a very simple garb, very modest garb out in the wilderness. These two very similar figures have different meanings in different contexts.